Hello and welcome to a bit of an art-themed book review for a change. Just a bit of a change from the more normal science fiction. And pardon the bags under the eyes. I wish I could claim that I was partying hard in the lead up to Christmas, but in actual fact, I'm staring down the barrel of 3 night shifts, and it's not pretty. The book I'm reviewing is The Painter by Will Davenport, and I went into it with some enthusiasm during my year of reading more about art-themed books. The story alternates between the past, 1662, when Rembrandt accidentally ends up in an English village called Hull, having fallen asleep on the ship of a captain bound for there. Unable to speak the language, he is taken for and treated like a stowaway, and ends up agreeing to paint a picture of the captain back in Hull, the captain's home, in order to pay for his voyage. And the picture he paints is not Rembrandt's best, but it does accurately reflect the quality of passage that he experienced going over, which obviously wasn't the best because it was a stowaway. Now, while he's in Hull, he enters into a competition with a poet who is a friend of the captain's at the captain's house. Both the poet and the painter will create a work of art in their respective fields for the captain's wife, which she will judge. The bet is on to see which has the better art, the artist or the poet, and both hope very much that the prize is going to be the captain's wife herself. Now, that was the theme that led me to pick up this book, and which intrigued me, and the theme was interesting. It was built out of a few different historical sources and hints, and it was well written. Now, I think the book does in the introduction talk about how it's a fictionalized version of a part of Rembrandt's life that isn't well known. And while it's not known that he was in Hull or in England at all, I believe, there is some reason to have had it debated. Anyway, that was the theme. We can treat it as fiction based on well-researched history. So, the historical sources and hints and the descriptions of painting and so forth, and of the house, very much of the house, are beautiful. They're well written, at times they're lyrical. The author talks from Rembrandt's point of view about colour, light, painting. I loved all of that. I did find the portrayal of Rembrandt himself often quite disappointing. I'd been reading a fair bit about him in that same year. I'd read one called Rembrandt's Whore, though admittedly that was much less about Rembrandt than about worms, which the author seemed to have a real obsession with. I'd read another one, it's around here, there it is. Rembrandt by Greg Watts, which I actually held on to, unlike the other ones. There was a really good description of Rembrandt and his painting. So Rembrandt wasn't a new theme to me, and from what I had read about him, and I think by that stage I'd already visited his house in Amsterdam and numerous sources. I mean, he's a famous man. From all of that, I could very well believe that he was arrogant, self-absorbed, generally insular, often quite rude. But in this book, in The Painter by Will Davenport, he is portrayed as an ignorant, idiotic, laughable buffoon. I'm not sure where that comes from, because never seen him portrayed that way anywhere else. He could have elements of buffoonery to him, but by all accounts, he was a very educated and interesting man. Certainly, he was inclined to drink too much. Anyway, I found the idiotic buffoon a bit sad at times, but anyway, it is after all interpretation. The author can do what they choose with their characters. I found Rembrandt himself a little bit disappointing. Meanwhile, I was really enjoying the 1662 segments. Also present in this segment was Marvel, a person I'm sure I've never heard of, though I thought I recognised the poem when it finally emerged in the script, and those were the good bits. The other side of the book, however, was 2001, where some chick called Amy, who is an unemployed painter and a descendant of the captain who got painted from Hull, gets a job at a historical house restoration, and this started out well. And I believe that leads through to the author's own interests. Will Davenport is actually a pseudonym used once or twice by James Long, who did write a lot of historical fiction early on, and then later in 2000 he started writing historical non-fiction, which also sounds good. I think that when he first started writing, one of the things that motivated him was a cottage that he'd hoped to buy and possibly restore. So the restoration part of the modern 2001 segment was actually really pretty good. Rightio. So Amy, for the first dozen pages, was pretty good. Then she gets to the house, and a romantic theme with some dude called Don begins. And I can't tell you how unreadable, tedious, and generally ignorable this extensive part of the book was. So there's a thing that can happen when people try to write across the gender line. In this case, it's a male writing a female, and I've seen that happen before. I'm not saying that it's just a male to female writing to character thing. I've seen plenty of females who do the same thing with male characters. Here, James Long, aka Will Davenport, is writing Amy. Clearly, when he started to form Amy as a character, he got some help from probably real women and how to form her. So initially she actually does present as a female, but she very shortly ceases to resemble a girl or even a three-dimensional character at all, and you do often see that when a person isn't really capable of imaging a person of the other gender. So once they establish them just a little bit, they just carve the character into a flat cutout and just move them around doing what they want them to do. Don himself, perhaps this kind of negates everything I just said about Amy, but Don himself is never anything but a stereotype. So he's two-dimensional from the get-go, and yet we have to slog through a remarkable amount of unbelievable Amy and dull Don in order for the story to progress. There's never any element of believability between the romance of these two. There is no smidgen of relatable attraction between them. There's nothing to save the poor reader, and the only two characters that give any mitigating light as to 2001 are two side characters, Dennis and Parrish, and their parts of the story, well believable, and the characters actually reasonably well rounded. They're exceptionally unsurprising in terms of plot. So now the really horrible thing about the unlikely Amy and dull Don story is that you have to read this part of the story in order to make the 1662 story believable, and that is totally unfair. I did resort to extensive skim reading to bypass the Don Amy bits. Don Amy? Amy Don? Amy Don? That sounds like a biscuit. Well, whatever. Okay. I only stopped for the diary and the history bits and just basically skim read everything else. And that worked well enough. But it's not what you want from a book. It's not what the author wants from you as a reader. It's not what I, the reader, want from the book. So that was regrettable. I was left mesmerised, actually, by the fact that the author did not feel that he had enough of a story to just write 1662 on his own. He could have. Why did we need 400 pages? It was a publishing company requirement, perhaps? Or were you paid by the word count? I don't know. Anyway, I thought it ruined a particularly good story. The Rembrandt and the Captain's Wife was a fine theme and not badly done. Why force us to put up with the dumb dithering of unbelievably aimless Amy and cut out dull Don? That was pointless. And yes, that is my subjective personal opinion about this book, but it's not just my opinion. Other people I know who've read this book said the same thing. They enjoyed the historical part, they did not like the contemporary part, and they did not see the point of it. So, whilst reading this story, I frequently put off reading because I couldn't bear the Don Amy Don. I did, however, really want to read to the end of 1662, and so I put up with that. And my humour with this book was not improved when I found that 1662 doesn't really have a conclusion. So there's not really any ending to it. It just winds down and then it stops. The 2001 has the aforementioned unsurprising conclusion, so I ended the book actually feeling a little bit sad, maybe even ripped off by it. Which was a shame, because there were many good things about it, historically speaking, and I have been thinking that when Will Davenport admits that he's James Long, I might actually look into some of his more historical based works, because I think if he stuck to history and didn't try to give us 2001 contemporary romances between two cardboard cutouts sort of kissing for no apparent reason, I think that might have been an improvement. So slightly disappointing book with some surprisingly good themes. It's actually, I think, a credit to this very experienced and reasonably well-known author's abilities that, despite me not liking how he did Rembrandt and not being able to cope with the contemporary romance at all, despite those two factors, it still ended up being a pretty good book. So yeah, anyway, if you're interested in Rembrandt, if you like art books, consider it. Consider it carefully, perhaps, but do still consider it. Like I said, the contemporary was not something that quite a few of us liked. But I did quite enjoy their home renovation part of 2001. So, pluses and minuses. Also, I want that house. I won't get it, but I want it.